Hello again and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the second of our seminars exploring the subject of word and letter, book and speech. My name is Lucy Barrett and I'll be hosting today along with Martin and Richard. Today's presentation will last about 40 minutes, during which attendees' mics will be muted. The talk will be followed by a question and answer session when attendees may unmute themselves. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Stephen Hirtenstein. Stephen has been editor of the Society Journal since its inception in 1982 and is director of Anchor Publishing, which has an exciting schedule of forthcoming publications, including a new edition of Ibn Arabi's Prayers for the Week, translated by Stephen with Pablo Benito and based on the best surviving manuscripts. Stephen is also engaged in a new book, again with Pablo Benito, called Patterns of Contemplation, Ibn Arabi, Abdullah Bosnavi, and the Blessing Prayer of Effusion. This is a translation, critical edition, and analysis of a prayer on the reality of Muhammad attributed to Ibn Arabi. Furthermore, this year Stephen is planning an English translation of Ibn Arabi's book on the divine names, Kashf al-Ma'na, which will be translated from Pablo's Spanish edition. Of particular interest to attendees will be the publication of the book by last week's speaker, Dunya Rasic, The Written World of God, the Cosmic Script and the Art of Ibn Arabi, which will be published by Anchor later this year. Today, Stephen will be exploring our theme of word and letter, book and speech through his talk, The Noble Letter with Multiple Aspects, the letter waw according to Ibn Arabi in poetry and prose. Stephen, please unmute yourself and begin your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for a generous introduction. And thank you to the Ibn Arabi Society for allowing me to give this talk. 40 minutes is the time allotted. I have no idea how long we'll take because actually there's an enormous amount to say. So if at the end of it I rush a bit, then maybe in the questions and answer session we'll have time. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So first thing to say is some of the images that I'm going to be using are based on photographs I've taken in different parts of the world. For example, like this one, which is from the Ulu Jami, the great mosque of Bursa, which is covered in extraordinary calligraphy. And here you can see one of the wonderful 4 wows. Next screen. So I want to start with a little quotation, which I came across recently. What an amazing job the pen does, drinking in darkness and pouring out light. This was written by an Andalusian man from Cordoba about 100 years before Ibn Arabi. And it says a great deal about writing and many other things besides, but it also contains the letter that I'm going to talk about today, which is in the and. So, Zulmatan wa Nuran, darkness and light. So I wanted to start with this waw, this letter, which is actually also a word in its meaning of and, connecting any two things, actions. Here we have opposite principles. And then a small quotation from René Guénon. The letters of the book are in principle all written simultaneously and indivisibly by the divine pen. These transcendent letters are the eternal essences or the divine ideas. And since every letter is at the same time a number, the agreement of this teaching with Pythagorean doctrine is evident. These same transcendent letters which are all the creatures, after having been principially condensed in the divine omniscience, have, by the divine breath, been transferred down to the lower planes and have formed and composed the manifested universe. So as you can tell, we are talking about a most enormous subject in taking this on. And first of all, I wanted to begin with this quotation because it sets the scene really for two levels of letters. One that René Guénon has called transcendent letters, and the others which are transferred down to the lower planes and composed the whole of the manifested universe, all creatures. So in that sense, we are all letters. But let's begin at the beginning, really. So what is a letter? I mean, for most of us, it's quite simply something that makes up a word, which we learned years ago when we learned our ABC at school. But for Ibn Arabi and those who follow him, and the whole conception of letter is quite different. So this talk is going to be an exploration of one letter, but it's particularly rich in meaning for Ibn Arabi, the letter waw. And if I had time, then I would probably ask you to just note down somewhere what you know about this letter. What does it signify for you? I mean, if you have Arabic, you will have some ideas. It might be quite a long answer, in fact. But if you don't have any Arabic, maybe it'd be quite short. So before I get into the detail of this, let me just say I want to thank Pablo Beneto, my friend and collaborator on so many books and works. And what follows is some of what will be in our forthcoming book on the patterns of contemplation. And I also want to acknowledge big debt to a book that I really started to discover because of this talk, a book by Keith Critchlow called The Hidden Geometry of Flowers. So as you go through this, some of the pictures I have utilized his drawings. So let's start with Ibn Arabi's discussion. He says that letters have 3 degrees: letters in thought, letters in speech, letters in writing. And this is in a book that he devoted to 3 particular letters, which are very unusual. And I'll say something about them in a minute. And you can see a little picture of the graphic form of a waw in the bottom, which is basically a kind of circle with a tail on it. So let's go through some of these ideas. First of all, there is a basic principle with Ibn Arabi that the letters are a living community. They are like us in that respect. They have life, because for Ibn Arabi, everything is alive. And the restriction that we put on life is rather like the restriction that we put on our ideas of letters. And like all communities, they reflect the whole realm of manifestation, high and low. So each letter points both to itself and to its origin. So the 3 aspects that Ibn Arabi lays out about the letter, thought, speech, writing, I'm going to go through just very quickly the whole idea of the waw. Let's start with the grammar side. It's what we call in English a lyyäka. So it's actually a word which means and, a conjunction. So we have ayam wa layali, days and nights. So it doesn't matter what it joins, it'll join anything with anything else. It also has another function which is similar to this conjunction function, meaning it's associated with. So sirna wa Nil means we traveled along the Nile. Literally, we traveled and the Nile. In English, we would translate it by a preposition. And the second one he died when he was returning to Mecca, and in the Arabic, the when is actually and, or looks like an and. So this is a different meaning for this wow, but it has the same basis of linking one action or thought with another. And finally, you've probably come across it, people who swear by something, who make an oath. Wallahi is very common in the Arab world. By God, we would translate it as, and very common in the Quran. Watin, the beginning of the surah, by the fig, we would translate it as. So we have already three variations simply in terms of how this word functions in a sentence. But let's move on to what happens when it's spoken. So as a letter, the letter W is the final labial, the last letter that you can pronounce on the lips. That's very significant because that means that after this, there's nothing else. There's no other sound that a human being can make. You can try this at home whenever you like. If you want to try the letters M, B, and W, and you feel how they are on the lips, you'll see that the W sound is the very last. So this is, if this is the last, then you might ask, what is the first? So the first one, in terms of sound, not in terms necessarily of letter, but in terms of the sound, would be a H, which is simply an articulation of the breath. And if you put the two together, as we'll see, you come up with the word huwa, or hu. So when Ibn Arabi is discussing this letter, he says alif, which in that sense is the principle of letter, belongs to him. And waw means you. There is nothing in existence but God and you. So already we are taking the discussion into an area where this waw includes every conceivable sound and possibility of speech. In writing, we also have to consider it. So as I've said, it looks like a little circle with a tail, but we'll find it written in important words. So I mentioned hu or huwa. It also appears in the name wadud twice, and it also appears in the name wahia. Now, sometimes in his poetry, Ibn Arabi is concentrating on one of these three. So, for example, the first one is something we're going to talk about quite a bit. The middle one appears in a set of poems devoted to the letter waw in another place in his diwan. And the last one appears in the prayers when he's talking about the letter waw as determining the Monday Eve prayer. So, a noble letter. This is what he writes in one of his works. The waw is a noble letter, or an eminent letter, a sharif letter, with multiple aspects and a rare and sublime source of knowledge. It is the first perfect number. It has a value of 6 and is made up of a half, which is 3 parts, a third, which is 2 parts, and a sixth, which is 1 part, adding up to a total of 1 whole, which is 6. So notice how he's doing the 1 and the 6. The waw is engendered from 2 noble letters, the ba, which has a value of 2, and the jim, which has a value of 3. The waw has the properties of the number 6, as well as the properties of the numbers 2 and 3. So this appears in his Kitab al-Mim wal-Waw wal-Nun on these 3 letters. And just to explain something that if you're not familiar with what the Greeks knew as perfect numbers, it's a number where if you add up the component parts, they come to the same total as the multiplication of the component parts, in this case 1, 2, and 3. The second number in this sequence, by the way, is 28, which also is a very important number in terms of cosmic manifestation, but 6 is the first one. So what's important about this to note is that the very first thing that Ibn Arabi reveals about the letter is its number, its numerical value. For most of us, number and letter are really regarded as different arenas, and we wouldn't associate a number with, for example, the letter W. So for most of us, 6 is one thing and W is another. We might also conceive of 6 days of creation if we'd had biblical training, and the idea of resting at the weekend, which now seems sacrosanct. We might know enough about numbers in themselves to know that this idea of the perfect number goes back to the Pythagorean tradition. We might also know about the benzene ring, where carbon and hydrogen atoms are combined in a 6-fold combination. We can appreciate snowflakes, which are based on a 6, and the cells of the beehive. Both of those reveal an extraordinary hexagonal structure. One of the things that Ibn Arabi says about number, which is sort of thrown in without much discussion, is that numbers are the first key. So here he is beginning to unlock the multiple aspects of the letter waw directly with the key of number. And he goes on to say something more. The waw is a letter which preserves itself particularly. This is why it's found within the heeness, the huwiyya, as the heeness preserves the unseen and never appears in manifestation. Later he says, by the way, that the heeness and the creator are identical. So here we're thinking of that which cannot be seen, that which abides in the unseen. So in this respect, the waw is more powerful than any other letter apart from the ha, simply because it is found within the heeness. It is not only found in manifestation. All other letters are found in manifestation, but this letter is also found in the heeness. We'll find out what that comes to in a minute. The ha preserves itself and others, while the waw only preserves itself. The ha and the waw are the same as the huwa, the he, which is referred to as heeness, huwiyya. So let's try and unpack some ideas in here which are important. We've got to think in terms of 6s and 5s because the value of ha is 5. The value of the waw is 6. So in the top right, you can see a representation of a beehive. And here we have, it's built on hexagons. And you can see that there are 6 hexagons around each hexagon. So you can see that the idea that the waw preserves itself particularly can be represented in the structure of any hexagonal formation. We can also see it in terms of numbers. So if you have 6 times 6, it becomes 36. 6 times 36, 216, and so on. 6 always appears at the end. And he says the ha, which is 5, preserves itself and others. So if you have 5 and 5, it's 25. 5 times 25, 125, and so on, 625. You'll notice that the 20 is being preserved all the time through this sequence, as well as the 5. He goes on to discuss this, but that would take us too far from where we're going. Let's just look at the form of the letter a little bit. Here you have a representation of huwa and huwiyya. So the huwa side has 2 letters, the he and the waw. And if you look very closely on the bottom left, you'll see that hidden within the letter he is the letter waw. So now we have a different kind of contemplation. These are not just one letter put together with another, but also we have the very letter ha contains a waw in its writing. And this is very significant. And I should also say that a ha on its own is a simple circle, nothing else. So now let's look at another aspect of this letter. It's one of these, what we call mirror letters, where the first letter and the last letter are identical. And it has a value of 6, as we've seen. There are others like this. Last year, I gave a talk on the noon, and it's also a mirror letter. This time it has a W or a waw in the middle of it. And the third one is the meme. It has M at the beginning, M at the end, the ya in the middle. Those are the values of the letters, by the way, 654. And this is how he describes the two wows. So the first wow is one thing and the second wow is another. The initial wow is the wow of heenus, the huwiya. So we've just seen that the letter he contains a wow. So this initial wow belongs in the unseen, belongs in the heenus. And the ha is contained within it as 5 is contained within 6. And the final wow is the wow of creation. The word is kaun, which has a W in the middle, as you'll see. The wow manifests in creation and in the heenus. Now we have 3 elements, all of which contain a wow. The creation, kaun, has a wow in the middle of it. The and is a wow. In the heenus, the huwiya also has a wow. So 3 aspects are being played with here in terms of wow. So hence it is in the middle between heenus and creation, and that is B, kun, but it's not visible. So I need to explain a little bit about the grammar here. When you say kun, you can see there's a U in the middle of it, which is a vowel, not a consonant. So this vowel is in the shape of the wow, but it's as if it hasn't quite manifested yet. When it manifests, it comes out as kaun, as creation. So here we have these 3 words. Huwiya, you can see the W. Kaun, you can see the W. Kun, you can see a prototype W, a single U. I mean, we could say a U and a W. And one other thing to notice, by the way, is there's an oddity about this book, Kitab al-Mim wal-Waw wal-Nun. The first letter is mim, the second is the waw, and the third is the nun. So in terms of numerical value, this is not in order. It's not 456, it's actually 465. Is this significant? Well, obviously the significance of putting the waw in the middle is not to do with number, but is to do with its connectivity between 2 things. So far, let's have a recap, apart from snowflakes. We have a center which links 2 sides, like an and. We have the fact that it's the last of the letters, the last possible articulation. So it completes and fully expresses the very first, which we can say in this case is the ha. It's a mirror letter which contains 2 wows. So it's both within the ha and it expresses the ha. It's manifest in God and it's manifest in creation. So in one sense, it is first and last. It's not just last. And a little reflection in terms of numbers. As we've seen, 6 is made up of 2 and 3, but it contains 5 in a rather mysterious fashion, which is that if you add all the digits up to 5, you come to 15, you add the 1 and the 5, and it makes 6. Now, these numerical computations, calculations, were very well known and certainly used by Ibn Arabi. But let's look at another angle on this, which is, according to a science which the Greeks called isopsophia, where the values of different words coincide in the abjad system. So in this numericalization of letters, we come to certain totals. So we get equivalences between words with same totals. So qalb, heart, 132 is also 6. The name Muhammad with the 5 letters is also 132, also 6. And the word markaz or center is 15, also 6. So you can see that by contemplating the number of things, the number and the letter together, we're beginning to enter an area where things are connected which are not connected intellectually. They're connected by virtue of their intrinsic sound and derivation. So now we're probably in a better position to consider the poem on the waw, which Ibn Arabi puts at the beginning of his Futūḥāt. This is a series of poems on each of the letters from Alif all the way through to Lam Alif, which in this sense is considered the end. So he begins with Alif and ends in Alif. He explains what he's doing in this second chapter. He's just described his meeting with the youth, and he says, this next chapter on the letters is the very first mystery that he learned in contemplating the youth's constitution as a written book. So this was the first line he recited. Now, these poems on the letters are highly elusive. They're difficult to understand. They're even more difficult to translate. And most sensible people would avoid dealing with them. However, fools rush in. So let's hope the angels will accompany us. I wanted to begin with an image of the first known copy of this poem. This is in the handwriting. This occurs at the end of the Ruh al-Quds, the book that he wrote in Mecca, detailing his experiences of people in the West and some of the spiritual experiences he had. And at the end of the book, all these letter poems are put. It seems to be the first copy that was ever made. Now, this particular copy is in the hand of Sadruddin Konevi's father. And as you can see, there are 3 lines, but actually there's a 4th line in the red because he forgot to put one in. The second image is Ibn Arabi's handwriting. Sorry about the image, we got off a microfilm. This is a collection of the poems from the Futūḥāt, which he put together and recited together. And the final version comes from the Evkav Musesi collection in Istanbul and is much more legible than the second one. And you'll notice, I think if my cursor can be seen, you'll notice there's an extra word. This occurs on 2 pages, which is why it looks a bit odd. But he's put in an extra word, which I'll come back to, bait, there. So this is the poem we're going to have a go at analyzing and comprehending a little bit. But first of all, I'm going to ask my colleague Pablo to unmute himself, and if he would be very kind and read the poem for us in Arabic.
وَليّاك أقدس من وجودي وأنفس فهو روح مكمل وهو سر مسدس حيثما لاح عينه قيل أرض مقدس بيته سدرة العلية فينا المؤسس.
Thank you so much. So here we go with a translation. The first line reads, "The waw of you alone is more holy than my being, more precious. For it is a perfected spirit, and it is a sixfold mystery. Wherever its wholeness shines forth, it is said to be Holy Land. Its house, the high lote tree, is founded in us. So it's a very mysterious poem with a lot of allusions. Let's try and unpack it as best we can. Let's start with the first two words, wow, lyyäka, the wow of lyyäka. So normal translation of lyyäka would be you alone. The wow of you alone is more holy than my being, more precious. This, for most of you, will be a familiar word because you will have come across it in the Fatiha. The middle line of the Fatiha is lyyäka na'budu wa lyyäka nasta'in. So you can see before the second lyyäka, there is the wa, the and. It is you that we worship and adore, and it is you that we ask for help and support. So this wow of lyyäka maybe will refer in some way to this line in the Fatiha. So now we are going to have to go for a little stroll through the Fatiha because this line is very interesting in the Fatiha. It is described as being shared between God and his servant. So in the Fatiha, as you no doubt be aware, we have 7 verses beginning with the Basmala. And here we have it in Arabic and in transliteration, and you can see the first lines from the Basmala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. These are in praise and glorification of God. They belong to God. We have the middle line, lyyäka na'budu wa lyyäka nasta'in. This line is said to be shared between us, the we of the na, and the you of the ka. And then the final lines are about us. Ihdinas sirat al-mustaqim, sirat al-ladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayr al-maghdubi alayhim wa la-dhalin. Guide us. So this last section is about guidance for us. So this last part belongs to us, first part belongs to him, middle part is shared. So in this middle part, this is the middle line, lyyäka na'budu wa lyyäka nasta'in. We have a few curiosities to look at. First of all, if we take the syllables, we have 6 syllables, lyyäka na'budu. And then we have a wow, and then we have lyyäka nasta'in, 6. The value of wow we've seen is 6. So there's something curious already about the number 6 in the Fatiha, in the middle of the Fatiha. Not only that, but this wow is not simply the center of the central line, it's the center of the whole Fatiha. On top of that, if we take the value of the letters ba and da in na'bud, it comes to 6. If we take the value of the letters in the nasta'in, the last 2 letters, also 6. Now, some of these contemplations, and many others besides, were clearly well known to those who came after Ibn Arabi. I don't have time to go into this circle drawing of a man called al-Ruyani. I've given you his dates. So we're talking about 200 years after Ibn Arabi. He was a Persian who went to live in Egypt. But if I take my cursor, upside down here, you can see the first part of the Fatiha, which belongs to God. Now, this whole semicircle at the top of the picture is what belongs to him. And the whole semicircle underneath belongs to us. So here, for example, we have the words Bahr al-Imkan, the sea of possibility. We are in the sea of possibility. Up here is Bahr al-Wujub, the sea of necessity. And this line across the middle is very interesting because it comes up with phrases like Qaba Qawsayn, the meeting of the two arcs, Majma' al-Bahrain, the meeting place of the two seas, and so on, other qualifications about the central line. And on either side of this central line, he has put lyyäka na'budu on the top half. It is you that we worship, and wa iyyāka nasta'īn is in the bottom half because there's something to do with being in this world that is related to the understanding of this. I personally am interested in whether this wow really belongs actually in the central line, because it's neither one thing nor the other. It's the joining point of the two. Anyway, I don't have time to go into this drawing. It's a huge drawing. Let's go back to wa iyyāka aqdasu. The wow of you alone is more holy than my being. And let's think about what does he mean by saying this. So we've seen that the wa iyyāka is in some sense the very center of the Fatiha. It is also the central word of the line we've talked about. But if we take the syllables of this line, sorry, the numerical value of this line, and we tot it up, we come to a value of 5. Now, the word lyyäka itself has a value of 5. We've seen that the wow has a value of 6. So it is as if we are saying the 6 of the 5. There is a 6 hidden within the 5. So I've already explained about adding up the digits 1 to 5, and you come to 6. But then we have two things here going on. We have a wow at the beginning and a wow at the end. The wow of you alone is more holy than my being. So we have the first wow of the word wow belongs to you alone. It's the wow of the huwiyya that we were talking about earlier. The last wow of my being is the wow of creation that we were talking about earlier. And then we have two other little elements in here. In the first part of the verse, the first hemistitch, we have aqdas, which is related to the word quds, holiness. We then have the final word of the line, anfas, which is also related to the word nafs. So we have already a polarity that is quite well known, quds and nafs. So if we go on to the second and third lines, keep my eye on the time because we have lots to go through. We have interesting elements here. It is a perfected spirit, ruh, and it is a sixfold mystery, sir. Wherever its wholeness shines forth, it is said to be holy land. So we have three elements here: perfected spirit, sixfold mystery, and holy land to think about. And we have the word that we've translated as wholeness, which is interesting, aynuhu in Arabic. We've translated it like this because we're very aware that the word ayn means I, as well as source, as well as essence. So it means that the whole circularity of something, the all-inclusive essence of something. So when this all-inclusive essence of the wow shines forth, it is said to be holy land. I'm going to come back to the perfected spirit in a minute in a different way. So you can see we have contrasts going on. We have a contrast between ruh in the first line, the spirit, and land in the last line. We also have some sort of a contrast between ruh and sir, between spirit and mystery. And we also have to consider that the last word in this third line is muqaddas. In the first line, we saw akdas. Now, akdas and muqaddas is a polarity that will be familiar to many of you. Most holy and holy. It's related to the idea of a fusion of two levels of existence. So when we were looking at the circular diagram, the top half of that is the akdas level, the most holy level, and the muqaddas level of manifestation, the holy level, is what comes in the lower half. So let's just quickly look at the fourth line. Baytuhu sidratul aliyya fina muassas. Its house, the high low tree, is founded in us. Its house, a very odd term, bait, because it could mean a tent, it could mean one line of the poem. It also obviously has associations with the Kaaba itself. But here, whatever this bait is the high lote tree, the celestial bait. That is founded, fina, in us. One of the things to say about this is that we started with lyyäka, lyyäka na'budu, it is you alone we worship. So now in this fourth line, for the first time, we have the we coming in. So it is as if the whole poem is a meditation upon the Fatiha itself, upon the central line of the Fatiha. So if we thought of it in terms of the Kaaba, this bait, we would also have to think in terms of 4 sides, 4 corners, 6 faces, 8 vertices, many other aspects of a singular house. So now I'm going to try and unpack some of the numbers in here. I'm looking now at the letter sin, which is the letter in the rhyme. And it occurs in the rhyming letters 5 times. The value of sin is 3. And if we multiply it, we get 15, which is 6. So here we have an example of 3 within the 6. This is no accident that Ibn Arabi is writing a poem on the waw, the 6, and he's using a rhyme letter, which has a value of 3. And also making sure that he's got 4 verses, so he ends up with 5 rhyming things, because the first hemistich, the akdas, has to rhyme as well. We've also got in the second line a 6-fold secret. So there's something going on with the number 6, which we have to try to understand. From other parts of Ibn Arabi's writing, you'll know that the manifested human being is in 6 directions, and the waw is actually the equivalent of the complete, perfect man. We also have the Kaaba, which has 6 faces. We also have the term in the third line, ard muqaddas, which adds up again to 15 or 6. So we're getting reflections of this same principle in different places. Now let's look about the 2, because we've already known that 6 is based on 2 and 3. So we've talked about 3. Here is the 2. We know that the waw has 2 wows in it, so already it's a mirror letter. We also know that lyyäka is repeated twice in that central line. We know that all verses are made in 2 hemistitches. So we have to consider that this 2-ness is going on through this poem in a rather mysterious way. Now, I mentioned earlier on that we have akdas and muqaddas. So if we look at the first hemistich, the first part of each line, it is akdas level. It is, as it were, divine level. If we look at the second part of each line, it is manifest level, created level. So if we look at the terms that have appeared in the first lines, we have perfected spirit, ruh mukammal. We have ayn, wholeness, we've translated it as, and Sidrat al-Aliyya, the high lote tree, which is heavenly. At the Muqaddas level, we have this Musaddas idea, sixfoldness. We have the Holy Land, Ard Muqaddas, with all its associations with Jerusalem, because when it's mentioned in the Quran, this is associated with Moses not being able to go to Jerusalem. And we've got Fina, us, plurality. So you can see in the second part of this poem, we've got the plurality side. Now we've got other numbers to consider because there are other ways of looking at a letter. We have, if we break up the letter waw into a W, an A, and a W, then the first W is a waw, the second A is an alif, the third W is a waw. So these are what Ibn Arabi calls constituents of the letter, and he is very well aware of what they do. So we have to consider that there's something also going on here. So if we total them up, we come to a total of 11. Now, the word ruh mukammal, this perfected spirit, also has identical number 137, making 11. The lyyäka, not lyyäka, but lyyäka is 38, which is 11. The huwa is 11. The name of the letter ya is 11. And why should that be significant? Because Ibn Arabi has something to say about the word lyyäka. He says there are two alifs in this word. The first one is I, the second one is a, and these are, between the two, there is a doubled ya. And when he's describing this in one of his works, he says, this ya is the total servant. And the ka belongs to God anyway. So everything belongs to God except the ya in the middle, which is the total servant. And the value of it is 11. Well, we have other numbers too. We have 10, could be 1. So the title of the poem was al-waw, not just waw. Al-waw, so is 4 and 6, which makes 10. Other terms, sir musaddas, this sixfold mystery is 10. The total number of syllables in the poem is 10. The total abjad value of the poem is 10. And why 10 important? 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10. Again, it's mentioned in various places in his writing. The 4 appears in the name itself. So we have a W, an A W, 616 makes 4. 4 verses in the poem. Major elements in the poem, spirit, mystery, earth, and tree, 4. And now, an element that I wanted to bring in to explain there's something else going on, because if the waw is the symbol of the perfect man, then the manifestation, instantiation of the perfect man is the prophets and saints. We have 4 prophets who are alluded to in these terms. You might have already picked up that Isa, Jesus, is always referred to as ruh. So ruh mukammal, well, could be. We have sir musaddas, the sixfold mystery. Does this not suggest the sixfold mystery of Solomon and the Solomon seal? We have ard muqaddas, which I've said has this allusion to Moses quite definitely. And finally, Sidrat al-Aliyya, Aliyya, high, has very much a suggestion of Idris. All of these prophets have seen in their name. It gets worse. Now let's think about lyyäka, which comes to a total of 9. First 2 words. The word ainuhu, this wholeness, all of it together, is 9. If we add up the 4 major terms, ruh mukammal, sir musaddas, ard muqaddas, as-sidrat al-aliyyat, it all comes to 9. The letter sin appears in the poem 9 times. And actually, when you count them up, there are 9 prophets of Sin who have the letter Sin in their name. So it seems that within this apparently arbitrary use of Sin, he's very conscious of alluding to things. What about the letter waw? Well, if we count it up, it also appears in the poem 9 times. In the first 2 lines, waw, twice, lyyäka aqdasu min wujudi wa anfas, fahuwa ruhun muqammam, wahwa sirrun musaddas. It turns out that there are 9 prophets of waw, and there are their names. It also turns out that Musa is the only one in both lists. And if we wanted to go one step further, we could say, in fact, there are 10 waws because the last one in the last line, which is actually a Hamza carrier, is therefore not sounded. If we counted that one, there would be 10 of the waws, which would make 60, which would return us to 6. So you can see that there is, within this poem, an enormous contemplation going on of different aspects, different lines of thought, different contemplative visions. And I shall just leave you with a small calligraphy which they come up with in Turkey quite commonly. Yahu, Yamanhu, which in translation doesn't do it justice, but O he, and O you who is he. So thank you very much.